Hi everyone, it's Niamh here and welcome to my art journaling channel. Today we're going to be looking at a quick art journal page done in the style of Dylusions, who's one of the signature artists for Ranger. So I'm starting off in the Dina Wakley new 6x6 journal and starting off with a base coat of titanium white paint from Amsterdam Paints. Now I've just been using this as a gesso because it's an amazing colour. It's got slightly warm tint to it, but any gesso would work the same. And instead of usually applying it with a credit card like I usually do, I'm actually applying this paint with a brush. Just because I had a brush sitting around, I decided to use it. So I'm also using lots of different Amsterdam paints in this, and I'm using the neon range. I love neon colours. At the moment I'm on a real neon colour kick, so anytime I get an opportunity to use them I do, and it particularly works well with this Dylusions style work. You can see I'm taking the paint straight out of the packet, the tube. Other times I just put it onto my desktop. This is done after I've been doing a few other pages in my journal, so you can see some other paints off to the side. I had some left over and I decided, well, I was going to play with these. So I'm just putting them down in a sort of haphazard way. I'm trying to put sort of at least 3 spots of the colour. I tend to do that a lot when I'm doing these sorts of patchworky type backgrounds. And again, if you've ever followed Dylusions, she tends to do that a lot with her inks and ink spray. She tends to put them down in lots of 3 and usually sort of in a patchworky type way. Please excuse my hand going up there, I had to grab something. This is another technique that Dylusions uses a lot, which is called ghosting. So you get a stencil and you get some wet wipes, which is why my hand was up in front of the camera before, and while it's still damp, the paint's still damp, you remove it with a wet wipe. Now to do this, it's really important to have that layer of gesso down first, because that means the paint isn't going to seep into the fibre of your paper and you are actually going to get that ghost image. The stencils I'm using are all Tim Holtz stencils. I just keep them on a little metal ring just so they're all together. Sometimes it's really convenient like that, sometimes they sit in the paint, so just be aware that if that storage technique does have pros and cons, but it does mean I can usually grab them fairly easily instead of trying to look for them. So this dries really, really quickly. One thing to be aware about neon paints in particular, they are by their nature a translucent paint. They're not very opaque, but they are extremely bright. So you do get these really cool effects, and they're really great for layering because you can see what's happening underneath, and they're great for just putting a really pop of bright colour on your page. The white, however, is a really opaque paint. So the Amsterdam paints are fantastic because they do have little symbols on their paints to tell you about the opacity of their paints. So you've got a bit of an idea before you buy them. So I decided I was going to do this sort of all in Dylusion style, and I'm using her die cut pack. I think this is from her first or second release, and some of her stamps. I love the animal head stamp set, and you can put them on anything and make it a little bit quirky. I've got the reclining lady there, and I've decided to put her hat on. I'm also using the Dylusions journaling block. I tend to use this more as a large acrylic block, but it comes in really handy for drawing borders and for drawing lines. But before I do that, I just need a little bit of black in the background. So this is a Creative Expressions, which is an English company stencil, and you can see it's well loved. I love those sort of random cross shapes in the background as a pattern, and I tend to use them a lot in my artwork. So I'm just using some glue to glue down these die cuts, and I'm not colouring them in. I sort of had a bit of a debate with myself whether I wanted to, but I decided because the background was so bright that I wanted to have that pop of black and white on my page. So I'm gluing these down, deliberately making the figure come off the edge so I could cut those off and have room for the owl head to be on my page. And now I'm going in and drawing a wavy border with my black pen. While I was doing this, I was sort of thinking about what I wanted to do, and I decided I was going to put a border. And again, that's a very reminiscent of the style that Dylusions does. She tends to put a border around all her work, and it usually is a sort of wavy one. And while I was doing it, I thought, oh well, it doesn't matter that it's going over the die cuts because that kind of incorporates them into the background. So I sort of debated whether to sort of put the line behind the die cuts or in front of it, and I decided I was going to put it behind, or in front of, sorry, so I could paint it and make it all look like one. In the past when I've done this, I've just grabbed a black permanent marker to put in my backgrounds, but I had the paint sitting there, so I decided just to grab out my black paint and to paint a border. And I'm quite glad I did because I got a really opaque black colour instead of having to go over it a few times with a pen. The other thing about using a pen on this, particularly because I've gone over the die cuts, is sometimes permanent marker does bleed depending on what the cardboard is, bleed through. So I could have got a blurry edge where I'd gone onto the die cuts, which I didn't particularly want. So the paint stayed where I wanted it to. So once I finished putting down the paint, I then was thinking about what I wanted to do in the foreground or in the middle. And again, another thing that Dylusions tends to do an awful lot is she does really good sort of snarky quotes. I was thinking about putting some of her big snarky stickers on it, and I'd end up doing that at the end, but I decided I wanted to handwrite a quote on this. So I just dry off my border, and before I did that, I went in with some of the neon pens onto the die cuts. So these are the Posca paint pens, just in the neon colours, and again, they're amazingly bright coloured pens. And they're possibly a little bit more opaque than using paint. So if you ever want a slightly more opaque neon colour, I'd go for the paint pens. So there you can sort of see me not doing much, but in actual fact I'm going through it on my phone. I go through Pinterest and look for some quotes that I was going to put down on my page. And the one I was particularly looking for was the quote about how people seem bright until they light travels faster, sound travels faster than light, or light travels faster than sound. Someone seems bright until you hear them speak. It's one that I remember, and it's one in the last few weeks has been very pertinent to different areas of my life, so I decided I would use that. So what I'm doing, and this is the way I do a lot of my hand lettering, because I'm not a great calligrapher by any stretch of the imagination, is I use a very pale, usually a warm grey colour, in my Copic markers, and write my quote, usually using the chisel end, so I've got nice block letters, and then I go round my letters with a black pen to give it an outline. So because the Copic markers are opaque, are translucent up to a point, you don't really notice the colour, and it just traps your background in there. And it's a really easy way to get block letters of the same height on your page. One of the other tricks that I use is I tend to draw light curved lines going bigger and smaller across my page and write in capital letters. So that sort of tricks the eye somewhat to make it look more like a pattern in the background rather than text. It's still readable, but it just sort of incorporates it in a little bit more to make it look like a pattern in the background. So light travels faster than sound, that's why people appear brighter until you hear them speak, is the quote. So once I've got around it in black, then I'm going to put a shadow around it in white, I think, or maybe I use a neon yellow. And again, just by putting the shadowing around it helps it pop out from the background that little bit more. In this page in particular, and a lot of pages, they come together quite quickly, but it's actually the sort of the lettering or this sort of bit that takes the time. So I actually go through and just dot within it to make them sort of like those billboard letters with the lights in them. Again, sort of tying it in with the quote that I've got. So if I'm doing that, I'm pretty sure that the next step after this is to put some shadows around it. Now when I shadow my work, I tend to always stick to the same pattern, and I've found that's really helped me not get tricked up when I'm doing it. Sometimes I get distracted and put them on the wrong end. So when I do shadowing, I always put it on the left hand side at the bottom. So the like the light source is coming from the top right hand corner of each letter. There's no reason for that, that's just what I've chosen to do. All you really need to do to make it look realistic or is to be consistent. So if you choose to do it one way, keep doing the whole quote or the whole thing on that page in that way, and you'll find that works really, really well. So now I'm going in with a white paint pen. Really important that you shake them up well before you use them. This is a broad tip pen, and you can see while I'm trying to be really careful, I am moving quite, it is obviously sped up, but it is quite a quick process. If you're really concerned about it, you could certainly use the finer pen, but I quite liked having that slightly thicker edge on it just to help it pop out again from the background somewhat. And you can see up in the sort of the top right hand corner, sorry, and that travels word, how that has helped pick it out of the background just that little bit more. This particularly works well if there's a much bigger contrast on the page. Because all these colours are quite light and bright anyway, there's not as much of a contrast, but certainly when you see it in real life, you can see those letters stand out from the background. So after I'd done that, I decided my border was just looking that little bit too stark, so I went in with my white paint pen, saying I had it out, and just made sort of a stripy border around it. And I really am glad I did that, because it just broke up the page, brought in a little bit more white, because the only white I had on the page was from the 2 die cuts, and again sort of tied it all in together, so you had that stark black and white contrasted with those beautiful neon colours. So this is pretty much the end of the video, just sort of finishing this off. If you didn't have the die cuts, which are readily available, you could certainly use some stamped images to do the same. But one of Dylusions also quite famous for in her artwork is to do a lot of collage from magazine collages. So you could certainly use different body shapes and different sized heads to make your own quirky person to sit on your page, and that would look really, really cool against some sort of quote in the background. Once I'd finished, I decided that I just wanted to put a little bit more neon on here, so I just added the pink and did a pink border around the edge, just to, again, frame it a little bit more and make it pop out from the edge, and make sure it sort of all worked together. And that's the end of my page. So I really enjoyed doing this page, and if you haven't come across Dylusions before, please check her out on YouTube and Instagram. She's got some amazing journal pages up there, and lots of people do stuff in her style as well. So it's a very fun, funky, quirky type of way to work. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, bye for now.